You boys be quiet down there!
Welcome back to PC-88 Paradise, the series where we talk about classic Japanese PC games for the NEC PC-88, and also discuss how these games are related to other classic games that you may know. If you're familiar with the game libraries of the TurboGrafX and Sega Genesis, you may have played a little game from Nihon Telenet called Exile. I remember renting and finishing this game on the Genesis and later buying the TurboGrafx CD version, which I loved and played through multiple times as a teenager. In my opinion, the game is an underrated action RPG of the 16-bit era which makes excellent use of the technology to create an involving story and atmosphere, especially with the Turbo CD version's music and cutscenes. The game's biggest flaw is that it ends far too soon. So seriously, if you haven't already, go give Exile a playthrough. It moves quickly and can be cleared in a matter of hours. But one thing I've always found a little weird about this game is that it begins with a band of characters who all seem to know each other already, and we are given very little of their backstory, almost as if there was some prior story that we didn't get to hear. Little did we know at the time, but Exile was actually part of a larger series that started way back in 1988 on Japanese PCs. Not only does the first game explain how Sadler and friends met, but the ending is so weird you'll have to see it to believe it. XZR was the name used for the first two PC releases. I am often tempted to pronounce it XZR, but if we look at the katakana, it turns out that this game is also supposed to be pronounced Exile. However, for the sake of clarity, throughout this video I will be referring to the console games as Exile and the earlier PC games as XZR. This chart shows the timeline of the entire series. As you can see, the story of Exile roughly corresponds to the events of XZR2. However, I must stress that XZR2 and Exile are entirely different games. Exile featured significant scenario changes, as well as a completely overhauled and streamlined game system, especially in the side view action portions of the game. Exile can be thought of as a remake of XZR2. So where does that leave XZR1? Looks like it takes place prior to the events of Exile. So by playing this game we can finally find out how these characters met, and what took place prior to the game I enjoyed so much. Today's video will focus on XZR1, specifically the version released for the NEC PC-8801. This game has been near the top of my most wanted list for quite a while, and while I wouldn't say it is completely impossible to find or prohibitively expensive, it took me years to finally snag this one. Say hello to the most recent addition to my PC-88 collection, and possibly one of the harder to find titles I am fortunate enough to own. Ooh, Soundboard 2 support listed clearly on the cover.
Yeah, this is gonna be a fun afternoon.
The back boasts various features of the game and lists some of the historical Middle Eastern locations you will be visiting: Baghdad, Isfahan, Babylon, Alexandria, and others. Let's see what's inside. Here's a flyer for Telenet Game Music Collection Volume 1, which contained music for Valis, Final Zone, Megami Tensei, and a lesser-known game called Shinra Bansho, which was a Space Harrier-type shooting game for the PC-88 VA, the PC-88's 16-bit cousin. This yellow sheet explains that if you send in the registration card for the game by August 20th, 1988, then you will receive a free music CD not available for retail. Since I don't see the registration card anywhere in here, I have to assume that the original owner got the CD. Wish they had kept it here with the game. And the manual. Though it is in black and white, it contains a lot of pages with illustrations, along with a long explanation of the historical backdrop of the game. Also, like many PC game manuals of the time, it is designed to work with all 4 different releases of XZR for PC-88, PC-98, MSX2, and the Sharp X1 Turbo. Finally, the floppy disks. Telenet usually used this sort of plastic sleeve thing to store 5-inch discs inside the case. I'm not really a fan of this since it makes it difficult to remove and insert the discs without bending them. The game consists of discs A, B, and C. To start the game, we insert discs A and B in drives 1 and 2. XZR is a story of the assassins in 1124 AD. The opening begins with our protagonist, Sadler, lighting up. He is introduced to us as the 20-year-old hero of the assassins, whose unrivaled skills in combat and swordsmanship are rumored to have led to countless quick and painless kills. The current target of the assassins is the Khalifa of Seljuku, the ruthless ruler of Baghdad. 4 assassins were already sent to take him out, but were lost and presumed dead. The first of them is a 16-year-old female assassin named Rumi, or Lurmi as the game calls her. I will call her Rumi. There's also Kindi, a deeply religious hulking assassin, Fakil, a mysterious magician, and lastly, a character who never appeared in Exile, a scholar named Safra Waldi. The graphics and BGM do a good job of making this an exciting opening. Just listen to the game spamming the soundboard too with all those percussion samples. After the opening, you're given two options, initial start or load start. As is tradition on PC-88 Paradise, I'll talk briefly about how game saves are handled here. You are given only one save slot and it is simply contained on Disk A of the game. The lack of write protection on Disk A seems a little concerning, but fortunately there are many ways to make a backup disk nowadays. At the time of release though, the lack of a disk backup feature built into the game made it a little less kind than games like Legend of Heroes, where they went out of their way to make sure you could back up the writable disks. Right away, the game looks surprisingly similar to Exile. You have a main overhead view and a map that you use to navigate between different areas. The game can only be saved when you are on this base screen, which is the opposite of how Exile works. You begin the game near the city of Baghdad with two main goals: eliminate your target, the Caliph of Seljuku, and if possible, find out what became of the 4 lost assassins. The first of them can be found right away in the first village. This is where Sadler and Rumi meet for the very first time. In the nearby city of Baghdad, we get to the first side-scrolling action stage of the game. The action in this game is similar to Exile but different. The graphics do look considerably older and the action slower paced. Zombie-like enemies slowly approach you and you can swing your sword at them. Many of you are not going to like this. You jump by pressing up on the D-pad. Though there are typically 2 trigger buttons on the Atari-type joypads used on retro Japanese PCs, they decided to use one of these for attack and the other to open the menu. I would have preferred using the keyboard to open the menu so that one of the trigger buttons could be used to jump. Unfortunately, using up for jump was not uncommon practice for many Japanese PC developers at the time, including Telenet. In addition, you can crouch, crawl, and perform a downward thrust. This downward thrust is actually the most powerful attack in the game and can be used to kill most of the bosses in one hit. A bit later in the game, Fakil will teach Sadler how to use magic. No, that K isn't a typo. The game's manual explains that unlike fictional magic is real and defined as anything that moves a person closer to fulfilling their ultimate destiny. If you Google this, apparently this is actually a thing according to some belief systems. Long story short, Sadler uses magic, not magic. Each magic is a different type of projectile that will be launched from Sadler's sword each time he attacks. I don't really see how that's any different from the pretend magic we're used to seeing in most games, but it certainly will help Sadler get closer to his ultimate destiny. Another thing you will notice is the vitals meter in the lower right corner. This is here because Sadler can use a number of different drugs in order to temporarily increase his attack power or defense, but all of them have side effects which will change Sadler's heart rate or otherwise negatively affect his physical condition. The game's developers envisioned a complex drug system that would be an integral part of this historical Middle Eastern adventure, but it was very poorly executed, and you're better off just ignoring it. Temporarily increasing your stats is never really useful in this game, and the drugs use up valuable space in your limited inventory that could be used for HP and MP restoring items. Since you can't sell anything in this game, I recommend either dropping the drugs as soon as you pick them up or using them right away if you're sure they won't kill you. Furthermore, the inclusion of many drugs like LSD that didn't even exist yet when this game is supposed to take place is another of the game's many historical inaccuracies. You'll see soon enough though that the writers of this game clearly didn't care much for historical accuracy. There are also lots of easy quality of life improvements the programmers could have made. For some reason the shops all boot you out as soon as you buy anything. If you want to buy multiple items, and oftentimes you will, you have to go back in. Similarly, the inns boot you back out to the base screen. I guess this is because this screen is supposed to represent the inside of the inn, but you're also taken to the same screen whenever you leave an area, so in the end it doesn't quite feel like it makes sense. After some time wandering around Baghdad and getting ripped off by the shopkeepers, I decided it was time to use a walkthrough. I definitely wouldn't have gotten far without one. There aren't any walkthroughs available per se, but rather what they call play diaries in Japan. These are blogs where a player details their daily progress through a game, and can be used as a walkthrough in a pinch. The first one I found was for the MSX game. which worked mostly okay for the PC-88 version. Later I found an even better one where the author was using the PC-88 version. The way you progress XZR isn't anything like Exile, where there is plenty of character dialogue explaining exactly what you need to do next. In XZR, the way forward can be pretty ambiguous and doesn't always seem logical. There is usually a particular NPC in a town you need to talk to in order to open up the next area or trigger the next goal. Oftentimes you need to pay money to a fortune teller or barkeep to get the info. Other times you actually need to stay at an inn in order to consult with your comrades. On top of that, the authors of the play diaries I was using weren't always exactly sure what they did in order to progress, and at a few points seemed to have left out some important information. Therefore, even if you can read Japanese and have these play diaries with you, it's not necessarily going to be easy. More than a few times during my adventure, I still managed to find myself hopelessly stuck, but somehow managed to finish the game eventually. Sadler's target is presumed to be residing in the palace in Baghdad, but we can't pass through the gate. One of the townspeople says that in order to pass, I need to collect 4 symbols of heaven, earth, water, and fire. Now one of the main goals of the game becomes collecting the 4 symbols. We also learn the whereabouts of one more of the 4 assassins. Safrawaldi's grave is right here in Baghdad. Well, that sucks. This is actually a pretty long game and there are so many weird things that happen, but here are some highlights. At one point, Rumi is captured and taken to prison. When we save her, she says she allowed herself to be captured on purpose in order to be saved by Sadler. There's no way I'm ever saving her again. After this, we are taken to the next map screen of the game, where we defeat a witch who is holding Fakil hostage. Fakil turns out to be the lecherous old man character archetype. He was allowing himself to be kept by the witch because she was hot. He's angry that we killed her and not happy to be rescued. He's a grump throughout pretty much the whole game. Kindi, it turns out, has been captured and sold to a circus, where he has become their #1 act. After completing some quests, the ringmaster decides to set Kindi free to join Sadler and his comrades. Looks like the party from Exile has been assembled, but Kindi sure looks weird on the map screen, like some kind of Japanese red Oni character. In the next area of the game, there's a river we need to enter in order to get an item, but it's too polluted thanks to an oil refinery upstream. Wait, oil refinery? The oil refinery owner agrees to shut down for a day if we can find him a unicorn. In this area we also meet a couple of talking birds who need us to take their egg to the top of the Tower of Babel. Okay, if it wasn't clear enough already, now we know that this game really doesn't intend to be taken seriously. After we accomplish this task, it's time to switch Disc B for Disc C. Guess we are now officially in the later parts of the game. The Alexandria map is the worst section of the game for so many reasons. There are 3 caves here you need to find and complete. The first 2 will require you to travel through these small cracks between the rocks, and these are the easy caves to find. Small passageways that look like they would be impassable in any other game are a common trick that XZR likes to use. The first cave is home to the worst enemy in the game. These bats spawn rapidly and won't let you pass. Why do video game bats always have to be so annoying? What I wouldn't give for an upward thrust move. If you try to take them on directly, they can easily take you out before you even know what happened. The next cave is a weird repeating stage where the door at the end just takes you back to the entrance. The way you get to the boss is by going through the cave normally once, then you immediately go back through the doors you just came through twice. For some reason, this takes you to the boss. The only hint regarding this is a cryptic line of dialogue from one of the nearby townspeople. There is no way I would have figured this out without a walkthrough. But this is nothing compared to finding the last cave. This one is so hard to find, for a while the answer was lost to time and unavailable anywhere on the internet in either English or Japanese. Many thought that the PC-88 version was broken and unbeatable. The author of my Japanese walkthrough detailed how he eventually found the answer. On an English language site of all places. At one of my old stomping grounds, the Tokugawa Corporate Forums. User Turbo GrafX posted the solution in 2011. Finally, the knowledge of how to finish this game was known to the internet. It turns out there's a secret entrance here on the back of this stone. No hints are given in the game other than a townsperson who insists that there are 3 monsters to defeat in the area. Clearly, Telenet didn't want many people to ever finish this game. There was never even a guidebook released. Once we're done with this horrible, confusing section of the game, we finally have all the symbols. So it's back to Baghdad so that we can enter that palace and take out our assassination target. Oh yeah, I practically forgot we were supposed to be doing that. As one final FU to the player, when you try to place the 4 seals to open the gate, it turns out they are fakes and don't work. This is quickly resolved when Fakil admits to switching the real seals for fakes, but this part feels like a bit of an unnecessary scare. After a short and sweet dungeon, we finally meet our target, the Khalifa of Seljuku. I'll give a bit of a spoiler warning here. Skip to the time shown on the screen if you're planning on actually playing this game. What do you think the twist is?
Luke, I am your father.
And if that isn't enough, he asks Sadler to join him so that together they can rule the Muslim world as father and son. Of course Sadler refuses, but just before the fight can begin, someone comes to help. It's Safrawaldi, the last of the 4 assassins, whose grave we saw in Baghdad. He explains that he faked his death. And he has a gun. Did they have those in the 12th century? With Safrawaldi's help, Sadler's father is easily defeated. Incidentally, this assassination is briefly shown in the opening of Exile.
Soon, a revolt led by an idealistic warrior called Sadler brought the Seljuk dynasty to its end.
Funny, that doesn't look much like how it happened in XZR. With their target taken out, the party returns to the assassin headquarters at Alamut Castle. There they find that all is not well, so I guess the game isn't over yet. In the castle we find the leader of the assassins, Shabaf, who sends Sadler on a journey through time in order to save the world. Or something, I guess. Now we're taken to the present day, 1988. We find our way out of Alamut Castle, which looks exactly the same but is now populated with machine gun wielding soldiers. We can go back to the village where we just were before the time slip, which looks exactly the same aside from the fact that it's deserted. I think they really should have changed the appearance of the village. It's hard to imagine it would look so much the same after 800 years. Time for the final stage of the game. We appear to be in a Soviet military facility where we are being attacked by soldiers with flamethrowers. This is where I finally managed to get Sadler stuck permanently on a ledge. No way to fix this other than resetting the game. Ironically, I got stuck again almost the exact same way on my next try. Guess you really don't want to be crouching on the edge of a platform in this game when an enemy spawns from the sky. The boss here looks a lot like a certain leader of the Soviet Union. Defeat him and immediately we are thrown into a modern city stage where we are attacked by pistol-wielding blue guys. The final boss room of the game has an American flag and a man who identifies himself as the President. Since this is 1988, I wonder who this could be. He sicks a white-haired monkey on you, who transforms into a monster. That's right, the end boss of the game is the President of the United States and a giant mutant monkey. Neither is any match for Sadler's Magic, though, so Sadler defeats the 1988 leaders of the world and is immediately whisked back to his own time period where he is reunited with his friends. Well, that was a weird experience, but at least the ending graphics and music are actually quite good. Most of the music in XZR is good, in fact, though there are a few duds. The Middle Eastern flavor they tried to give some of the tracks can sometimes give it a strange dissonant sound that can take some getting used to. The biggest issue with the music is that some of the tracks are used far too often, while others only make short appearances near the end of the game. Most of the time you will be hearing one of two tracks, the BGM used in almost all the side-scrolling stages, or the BGM used in all the overhead parts. This gets old very fast and seems wasteful since the game has plenty of other perfectly good tracks they could have used more. As mentioned earlier, XZR was also released for 3 other PCs, but the PC-88 and X1 Turbo versions are so rare there's hardly any information available about them online. From all accounts though, they are graphically identical to the PC-88 version. The MSX version, on the other hand, isn't too hard to find, and is significantly different. Even though the PC-88 is also an 8-bit machine, the MSX version feels like a true 8-bit style XZR, With its simplified action stage graphics and square tiles used for the overhead parts, it feels a lot like something you would see on systems like the NES or Master System. Secret passages appear as visible holes in the ground in this version, making them much easier to find. XZR is a game full of great ideas. The combination of overhead RPG and side-scrolling action is done brilliantly. The Middle Eastern setting is refreshing, and Sadler and Rumi are really great-looking characters. You can definitely see the foundations of what made Exile great. But is XZR a good game? Well, no, it really isn't. I'm not sure I was able to accurately convey through this video how ambiguous and tedious it can be to progress the game, but trust me, it's a grueling and seldom enjoyable process. And as I've said in previous videos, well-designed RPGs really shouldn't require a walkthrough, in my opinion. The action stages have their moments where it almost feels like you are playing a good game, but clearly the action stages are also not without their issues. Tonally, the game feels inconsistent. The long history lesson in the manual and opening sequence makes you feel like you are about to play a piece of hard-boiled historical fiction. They even went out of their way to emphasize that there's no pretend magic in this game, it's magic. But it all quickly breaks down into a silly magical world that also, by the way, constantly breaks the fourth wall, with townspeople talking about video games and music CDs. One could argue that all this wackiness was intentional. After all, the end of the game has you taking out the 1988 world leaders. And even Exile had supernatural themes and time travel. But there they seem to have exercised some restraint, and it somehow doesn't ruin the world or atmosphere of the game. It feels like an interesting fictional world, roughly based on the real one. In XZR, it seems like they couldn't decide whether they wanted to go with a history lesson or outright zaniness, and in the end it just doesn't quite come together. And I'm not alone in my sentiments. The authors of the two walkthroughs I used also both constantly ridicule the game and its weird choices. One of them gave the PC-88 version a grade of C+ in his mini-review. I hate to be negative about this game. I hunted down an original copy for my collection because I wanted to play it. As a collector, I often find it harder to get involved in a game unless I own a physical copy. No one wanted to like this game more than I did. I really wish I could recommend you go play XZR for yourself, but instead I think it is better examined as an interesting piece of gaming history, which later led to the development of a much better game. And speaking of Exile, what about the PC-88 game that it's roughly based on, XZR 2? Well, we'll have to talk about that one in a future video. Until then, thank you for watching PC-88 Paradise on our channel Basement Brothers. As always, please like, share, and subscribe, and hit the bell if you haven't already. Hope to see you back again soon.